seconds before settling on a small stone floor below. "A chamber," he said quietly, "and one not sanctified." We descended carefully. The air was damp, and the walls closed around us with claustrophobic weight. At the bottom was a room no more than 10 feet across. Stone shelves lined the walls. Upon them, papers, ledgers, and to my horror, bones. Not relics, human remains, skulls, femurs, ribs, stacked without reverence, some with fragments of cloth still attached. Holmes said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned to a shelf and pulled free a parchment tied with blue ribbon. "Watson," he said slowly, "we are not merely looking at financial fraud. This is a record of burials that do not appear in the convent's registry." I took the parchment. It bore a list of names, many crossed out, with phrases beside them in Latin. Expurgatus, traditus, silentium, purged, delivered. Silence, I translated grimly. Holmes nodded. "And look here, at the bottom." He pointed to a final entry. "Magdalena, marked, too late." I stared at him. "She discovered this room," Holmes said, "or at least enough to piece together the truth, and she paid the price. Then these bodied, disappeared novices, runaways perhaps, or those who refuse to comply. There is a pattern of removal, Watson. Someone has been sanitizing this convent's history permanently. But why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he moved to a stack of older ledgers and extracted one bearing a red wax seal. As he opened it, his face darkened. "This name! Sister Beatrice. She appears too often. Author of the cipher, keeper of the records, the spider at the center of the web. And yet the Reverend Mother protects her. Out of fear, or blackmail?" Holmes's eyes glittered. Perhaps both. We returned the lid to the sarcophagus and made our way up, hearts thudding in time with each echoing footstep. At the top of the crypt stairs, Holmes paused. "Watson, be on guard." He was right to say it, because as we stepped into the chapel, a figure darted across the altar, robes fluttering, lantern swinging. Holmes sprang forward. "Stop!" he barked. But the figure vanished into the cloisters beyond. We gave chase, our lanterns swinging wildly, illuminating archways and shadows alike. I caught the glint of a habit turning left, and followed. I lost Holmes in the darkness. Footsteps echoed ahead, and I quickened my pace, through the cloister hall, past the infirmary, until a sharp blow struck the back of my head. I crumpled, stars exploding behind my eyes. I do not know how long I lay there. But when I came to, Holmes was kneeling beside me, fury in his eyes and blood on his lip. "They tried to silence me, Watson, and you." "Who?" I rasped. "Sister Beatrice, or whoever she truly is." Back in our room, Holmes poured water over a gash on my temple and handed me smelling salts. I came fully round. She
couldn't ignore. Underneath the latte art and daily grind lay inefficiencies, disconnections, longing for recognition, small acts of grace. The quiet verdict. Harold took a bite of the sandwich. Humble, unpretentious. It wasn't gourmet. Not bad, just adequate. But the real nourishment came from what unfolded around him. The sweat of small kindnesses, friction, authenticity. As rain hammered on, Harold closed his notebook, absorbing the pulse of his people. And in that moment, he recognized the weight of a decision he couldn't yet make. The break room door had been left ajar, just wide enough to reveal a quiet truth. Inside, employees stood hunched over plastic containers, eating lunch on their feet because the space hadn't been outfitted with enough chairs. A small moment, seemingly insignificant. But to Harold, it spoke volumes. These weren't oversights. They were symptoms of a system that optimized profits while leaving people behind. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his assistant blinked on screen. Board meeting rescheduled to 3 p.m. They want preliminary expansion approval today. He nearly chuckled at the irony. If only they could see him now. Just a quiet man in a thrifted coat, finishing a modest sandwich in a cafe he technically owned, scribbling down notes on morale instead of market shares. As he folded his notebook, preparing to leave, Maya appeared once more, this time holding a small paper cup of water. "I noticed you were coughing earlier," she said softly, placing it beside him. "Thought this might help." Harold looked up, momentarily stunned. In all his years building Knight & Company, he couldn't remember the last time someone had shown him such simple, instinctive kindness. No expectation, no performance, just care. "That's very thoughtful of you," he said, taking the cup with quiet gratitude. He paused, searching her face, and then asked, "Can I ask you something? Do you enjoy working here?" Maya glanced around cautiously, then slipped into the seat across from him for just a moment, shoulders still tense, as if sitting too long might get her written up. "It's a job," she answered, her words deliberate. "I try to focus on the good parts. Most customers are decent, and I like being part of their mornings, even just a little bit." Her eyes drifted. "And the company?" She hesitated. A shadow flitted across her expression, and Harold caught it before it disappeared. "They mean well, I guess. I'm sure they're doing their best." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. That kind of silence was rare in business, Harold thought. He stood up, leaving behind a $5 tip, more than double the cost of his sandwich. Maya blinked in surprise. "Thank you for the service," he said simply. Then, pausing at the table's edge, he added, "And, Maya, keep being kind. It matters more than you know." She smiled, unsure how to respond, but her eyes softened. As Harold walked toward the door, he heard her call gently behind him, "Have a wonderful day, sir." Outside, the rain had gentled into a quiet drizzle. Harold stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back through the rain-streaked glass at the cafe's warm interior. In a few hours, he'd be seated in a boardroom surrounded by charts, projections, and men who measured success in dollar signs. But now, all he could think about was a young woman named Maya who brought water to strangers, crouched down to speak to children, and shielded her co-workers from consequences they hadn't earned. She was the embodiment of the values his company bragged about on glossy brochures and internal videos. And that haunted him. What would happen to someone like Maya when the business stretched from 800 stores to 2,000? Would the culture that birthed her kindness survive the machinery of scale? Or would she be crushed beneath it, her empathy replaced by protocols and quotas? Harold pulled out his phone and wrote a note, one that came from instinct more than intention. "Maya, Brixton Grounds number 347, represents best of company values. Protect at all costs." He didn't know that in less than 24 hours, that note would trigger a reckoning inside his company and place Maya at the heart of a corporate storm that would shake the foundation of everything he had built. But that reckoning hadn't arrived yet. He still had 4 more cafes to visit, and far off on the horizon, beyond what any weather app could predict, darker clouds were gathering. He'd just refilled his water and returned to his seat when the air in the cafe shifted. Not physically, but atmospherically, like the heaviness that arrives before a storm. The front door swung open with unearned authority, and 2 figures strode in with the stiff posture of boardroom power. Their suits were expensive, their shoes spotless, their smiles sharp and insincere. Kelsey Marlowe entered first, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun that dared anyone to challenge her. As regional director, she governed 12 districts and had a reputation among employees. Efficient, emotionless, ruthless. Trailing behind her was Greg Tillman, VP of Operations. Louder than necessary, his stomach straining against his designer shirt. His laugh always seemed just a bit too performative, like someone who never quite believed his own punchlines. Harold recognized them instantly. He'd sat across from them in sterile conference rooms, heard them deliver strategic forecasts in impersonal tones, but they'd never recognized him. Today, dressed like any ordinary customer, he was invisible to them. "Maya," Kelsey's voice sliced through the cafe like a scalpel. "Where's your manager?" Maya straightened from wiping the espresso machine, tension overtaking her features. "Jennifer's in the back office, Ms. Marlowe. Should I go get her?" Kelsey scanned the space like a general inspecting her troops. "We're conducting an investor-facing walkthrough. Everything needs to be perfect." Harold watched as Maya moved quickly toward the back office, her usual grace now replaced with a subtle panic. Around the cafe, employees snapped to life, restocking supplies, smoothing uniforms. Even the teenager who'd mocked Harold earlier was now frantically aligning napkin dispensers like his life depended on it. Greg's booming voice echoed across the floor. "All right, people, we've got high-profile eyes on us. This location represents Knight & Company at its finest. Brighter smiles, quicker steps, no exceptions." Then he spotted Harold. His eyes paused on the coat, the hat, the paper cup. "No undesirable elements cluttering our customer experience," Greg sneered. The words hit Harold like a slap. Undesirable element. In his own cafe, Jennifer appeared from the back office, visibly rattled. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a decade of loyal service behind her. Harold remembered her file. 10 years in, consistent reviews, newly divorced, raising 2 kids. "Ms. Marlowe, Mr. Tillman," she greeted them, slightly out of breath. "Surprise inspections are the only way to see the truth," Kelsey replied coldly. Her eyes locked onto Harold again, disapproval curling her lip. "Jennifer, what's your policy on loitering?" Jennifer followed her gaze to the table. "Well, customers are welcome to stay as long as—" "Look at him," Greg interrupted, voice rising. "He's been here nearly an hour, drinking free water, taking up a prime table during peak hours. People like that drag the brand down." All eyes turned to Harold. Maya's expression crumpled. Other patrons looked uncomfortable, but Harold remained still, his features unreadable, his mind burning with a quiet fury. Kelsey gave a brisk nod, her approval as calculated as everything else about her. "Exactly," she said, eyes still not meeting Harold's. "Our demographic data shows that the presence of certain types of customers can reduce average spend by up to 23% among our target audience." She said it without hesitation, without realizing the man she spoke of sat just 10 feet away, hearing every word. "Jennifer," Kelsey continued, turning sharply to the manager, "I want you to enforce a firmer customer rotation policy. Water is for paying customers only, and perhaps consider classical music. It tends to discourage lingering." Before Jennifer could respond, a quiet voice broke the tension. "But ma'am, he did pay." It was Maya. Her words were barely above a whisper, but they carried the weight of someone standing up against something she knew was wrong. "He bought a sandwich." Greg snorted, the sound sharp and condescending. "A $2 sandwich, probably counted his change twice before ordering." Laughter followed, cruel and careless. Harold caught the shift in Maya's face, an involuntary flush of both anger and embarrassment. Her lips parted as if to say more, but a sharp look from Jennifer made her stop cold. It was the kind of look that said, "Choose silence if you value your job." Kelsey had already pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "Jennifer, I'm logging this as a management oversight. Your inability to maintain proper standards reflects poorly on this location's readiness for expansion." The subtext was louder than the words, "fall in line or be left behind." The cafe's inclusion in the $250 million expansion plan now hung in the balance. Still seated at his table, Harold remained motionless, his expression unreadable. But beneath the surface, his hand moved swiftly, jotting into the weathered notebook on his lap. Every insult, every dismissal, every calculated cruelty. He wasn't just taking notes, he was collecting truth. Greg stood tall, surveying the room like a general who'd won a minor battle. Much better energy now, he announced smugly. This is the kind of environment that attracts premium customers. Clean, efficient. His gaze settled on Harold once more. And properly curated. As they moved toward the kitchen for the next phase of their inspection, Kelsey paused beside Harold's table. Her voice was sugary, but her tone left no room for misunderstanding. "Excuse me, sir. I'm going to need you to make another purchase or give up your seat. This section is reserved for paying customers." Harold looked up, his face calm and almost confused. "I did purchase something," he replied evenly. "That was an hour ago," Greg interjected, not even slowing his stride. "Time to move on, buddy. Maybe try the McDonald's down the street. More your speed." The cruelty wasn't just in the words. It was in the indifference. Harold had endured far worse in his life. But this was different. Because it wasn't about him. It was about the system he had built, now mutating into something unrecognizable. As he gathered his notebook and empty water cup, Harold caught Maya's eyes across the cafe. She looked devastated, not for herself, but for the quiet shame of witnessing cruelty under the banner of the very company she worked for. "Have a nice day," Harold said gently. Neither Kelsey nor Greg responded. They were already laughing over Greg's phone, joking about where to go for lunch. Harold heard it all. Every word, every chuckle, every act of casual dismissal. And as he stepped out into the cool gray air, one thought echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. They have no idea what they've just done. The storm that had hovered on the horizon now gathered overhead, but Harold didn't leave. Not yet. Instead, he circled the block and slipped into a small bookstore next door, a quiet place with dusty shelves and a wide front window, one that offered a perfect view of Brixton Grounds Cafe. 20 minutes later, they emerged again, now seated at a table near the center of the shop. Jennifer trailed them, like a reprimanded child, her face tight with unspoken stress. Tablets came out, documents spread. Greg was snapping staged photos of their investor walkthrough, while Kelsey carefully arranged papers to look effortlessly impressive. Harold adjusted his coat, pulled his baseball cap low again, and stepped back inside the cafe. The doorbell chimed softly. Behind the counter, Maya looked up, and the flicker of surprise in her eyes gave him pause. He moved with the unhurried gait of a man with time to spare, stopping at the counter. "Excuse me, miss," he said, just loud enough for the nearby table to hear. "Mind if I ask you a few questions about working here?" Maya's eyes darted to where Kelsey and Greg sat. They were already watching. Sure," she said carefully. "What would you like to know?" Harold leaned against the counter, his tone casual. "I'm thinking about applying here. Do employees get health coverage?" The question landed like a dropped glass. Maya blinked, clearly thinking through her answer. "Well, some employees do," she started, slowly. But before she could finish, the sharp scrape of a chair rang out. Kelsey was already crossing the cafe with heels that struck the tile like a metronome. "Excuse me," she cut in smoothly. "I couldn't help but overhear. Health coverage is provided to all full-time employees who meet our eligibility requirements." Harold turned to her, nodding as if genuinely interested. "And what makes someone eligible?" 35 hours per week, 6 months of employment, satisfactory performance," Kelsey recited without blinking. "Excellent," Harold said. "So most of your employees here qualify then?" Before Maya could speak, Kelsey cut in again. "Maya, why don't you go check the storage room for us?" Her voice was friendly, but the message was clear. Leave. Now Harold watched as Maya walked away, her posture tense. She didn't want to go. Her silence spoke volumes. "So," Harold continued, now facing Kelsey directly, "about those hours, how many do most employees actually work?" Kelsey's plastic smile twitched. "It varies. Depends on availability and business needs." "Sure," Harold said with a nod. "And do employees get proper breaks? Seems like it'd be tough standing all day." By now, Greg had joined them. looming like backup muscle in a tailored suit. "Is there a reason for all these questions?" he asked, his tone edged with suspicion. Harold gave him the same relaxed look. "I just want to be sure this is a good place to work. I've had jobs before where employees weren't treated well." Kelsey's jaw tightened. "We treat our employees very well," she said through clenched teeth. "Knight and Company is committed to a positive work environment." "That's great to hear," Harold replied. "So regular breaks are guaranteed?" Greg finally snapped. "Employees get breaks as required by state law." Harold tilted his head, studying them both. Not just their words, but their postures, their restraint, their rising anxiety. The trap was beginning to close, and they still had no idea who was standing in front of them. Required by law, not because it's the right thing to do. Harold's words dropped like a thunderclap in the middle of a composed performance. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Kelsey and Greg both stiffened, their polished confidence cracking like thin ice under pressure. Around the cafe, employees busied themselves with pretend tasks, but their eyes clung to the unfolding confrontation like it was oxygen. Kelsey's voice turned cold. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're implying." "Oh, I'm not implying anything," Harold said with disarming innocence. "I'm just trying to understand the company culture. For example, are employees encouraged to speak openly about concerns? Do they feel safe being honest about their working conditions?" From across the room, Harold saw Maya watching, her brows furrowed with concern. She knew, instinctively, that this wasn't just a customer complaining. This was becoming something else, something dangerous. Greg took a step forward, puffing up with performative dominance. "Look, buddy, I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but this isn't a social services office. If you're not buying anything, you can move along." Harold didn't flinch. "Actually, I was thinking about getting another sandwich, but I'm curious, do managers here get bonuses for keeping labor costs low?" Silence slammed down like a dropped curtain. Kelsey's face went pale, then flushed red. That kind of question was strictly off the table. The bonus structure was internal, deeply buried in HR documents and never discussed outside corporate circles. "Who exactly are you?" Kelsey demanded, her mask of professionalism finally slipping. "And why are you asking about internal policies?" Harold shrugged, still calm. "Just a concerned citizen. I believe people should know what kind of companies they're supporting with their money." "You're not a customer," Greg spat. "You're some kind of activist or a union guy. I want you out." The cafe froze. Every eye in the place was locked on the scene. Some wide with shock, others narrowing in quiet understanding. Jennifer hovered near the back, visibly torn between duty and decency. "I haven't done anything wrong," Harold said, unbothered. "I've been polite. I asked reasonable questions. I even offered to make another purchase." "Your questions aren't reasonable," Kelsey snapped. "They're invasive. You're harassing our staff." Harold slowly turned, locking eyes with a few of the staff who had clearly been listening. "Is it harassment to ask if workers get health insurance or breaks between shifts?" That's when Maya appeared at his side, her voice low but urgent. "Sir, maybe you should go. They're really upset. I don't want them to get more aggressive." Harold looked at her, this quiet protector in an apron, her eyes wide with fear, not for herself, but for him. "Thank you, Maya," he said gently. "You've been incredibly kind." He turned and headed toward the door. Behind him, Greg muttered to Kelsey, "Get his picture. I want security to know his face." Harold paused at the exit and turned around one last time. "Oh, and one more thing," he said clearly. "Does Knight and Company have an ethics hotline?" Both executives blanched. "Because I think I might need to make a call." And then, without fanfare, he disappeared into the soft gray afternoon. Harold didn't leave the neighborhood. He parked his rental car in a nearby garage and pulled out his laptop. What Kelsey and Greg didn't know was that Harold Knight had access to everything. The cameras, the comms, even the encrypted conference channels used by the board. At exactly 2:30 p.m., he logged into the Knight and Company intranet through an invisible back door his security team had installed for monitoring. Today, he wasn't joining the meeting as the CEO. He was there as a ghost in the machine. A message pinged across his screen. Patricia Chin. Something's off in the field reports. The numbers don't match what employees are telling me. Heads up before the board meets. Harold's expression tightened. Patricia had been his confidant for months, feeding him breadcrumbs that exposed growing dishonesty inside the upper ranks. It was her intel that inspired his undercover journey. Now it was time to see the rot for himself. At 2:45, the meeting began. Faces filled the screen, polished, poised, and perfectly rehearsed. The board of directors surrounded their marble conference table like monarchs at court. And there, patching in remotely from Brixton Grounds Cafe, sat Kelsey Marlowe and Greg Tillman, transformed. Gone was the bitterness, the power games, the open disdain. Now they radiated warmth and precision, their voices butter smooth. "Good afternoon," Kelsey beamed. "Greg and I just completed our review of Brixton Grounds, and I'm thrilled to report that everything is running exceptionally well." Harold clenched his jaw, watching the performance unfold. "Staff morale is high," Greg added, his earlier cruelty now replaced with sparkling enthusiasm. "Employees are energized, proud to represent the brand, and fully aligned with our mission." Harold opened his notebook and began writing, furiously, intentionally, capturing every deceit as it left their mouths. Board member Patricia leaned forward. "That's great to hear. Did you get to speak directly with staff about their experience?" "Absolutely," Kelsey said without blinking. "We had informal chats with several employees. Feedback was overwhelmingly positive. They praised the benefits, the flexibility, the supportive management." Harold's pen nearly tore the paper. Moments ago, they'd humiliated a worker for asking about breaks and accused a man of harassment for inquiring about benefits. "And what about customer feedback?" asked CFO Robert Martinez. Greg grinned. "Fantastic question. The customer demographic was perfect. Professional, brand loyal, and delighted by the experience. We saw repeat customers, clean operations, truly a model store." A lie. Every word. They had thrown him out as an undesirable element, mocked his $2 sandwich, and treated Maya like a liability. Patricia leaned in again, voice steady but laced with suspicion. "Any operational concerns we should flag?" "Minor ones, easily addressed," Kelsey said smoothly. "Inventory's tight. Staffing is optimal. Location's ideal for expansion." Harold felt his heart pounding. The truth was the opposite. Understaffed floor, overwhelmed manager, and a frontline team carrying the weight of poor leadership. Greg concluded with flourish. "This location exemplifies what we want to scale. The culture, the execution. It's a template for global growth." William Thompson, the board chair, nodded. "Excellent. This builds confidence for moving forward with the $250 million." Harold watched in silence as the machine revved into motion, driven by fabrication. But he wasn't done. Patricia wasn't either. "I'd like more detail on employee satisfaction," she said slowly. "What did they tell you about management? About working conditions?" A flicker passed between Kelsey and Greg. And then, Kelsey smiled again. A little too wide. "The employees we spoke with were especially complimentary about our healthcare offerings and scheduling flexibility," Kelsey said, her tone buttery and composed. The lie came out so smoothly it might have passed for truth. One employee even mentioned how much she appreciated the company's commitment to work-life balance and opportunities for professional development. Harold felt his stomach twist. He knew exactly who Kelsey was referring to, Maya. The same young woman she'd silenced and dismissed, who had offered kindness without condition, and who now had her words twisted into corporate propaganda. He wondered if Maya had any idea that her sincerity was being used to sell a fantasy. "They're clearly proud to be part of the Knight and Company family," Kelsey concluded. Greg chimed in, doubling down. We observed genuine enthusiasm and a strong sense of ownership in the company's mission. As the video call wrapped up with warm congratulations and unanimous support for the expansion, Harold sat motionless in the front seat of his parked car, eyes locked on the laptop screen. He felt as if he had just watched a magic trick, except the sleight of hand had been performed with boardroom jargon instead of playing cards. A day of humiliation, cruelty, and systemic failure had just been rewritten into a polished tale of excellence. And they'd done it so effortlessly, so confidently, that even seasoned board members were now preparing to sign off on a $250 million expansion. Harold closed his laptop with deliberate calm. Enough. He had seen everything he needed. Tonight would be for phone calls and gathering receipts. But tomorrow would be Judgment Day. The next morning at precisely 6:30 a.m., Harold stood in front of his hotel mirror, razor in hand. Each pass over his jaw stripped away layers of scruff. And something else. The man in the reflection no longer looked like the soft-spoken loner in thrift store clothes. That man had been underestimated, dismissed, mocked. With every clean stroke, Harold reclaimed something powerful. His suit had already arrived, delivered by his assistant, a tailored charcoal wool blend with Italian leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, the platinum cufflinks, the heirloom watch, the silk tie, all the battle armor of corporate royalty he had once worn so easily. But now, the weight of it all felt different. He no longer wore it out of pride, but out of necessity. He was about to go to war. By 7:45 a.m., Harold was walking through the marble-clad lobby of Knight & Company headquarters. The effect was immediate. Staff stiffened, whispers trailed behind him like perfume, and assistants scrambled to alert their bosses. Harold didn't stop for anyone. He moved like the tide, slow, inevitable, and impossible to ignore. His destination was the boardroom, where an emergency meeting had been called for 8 a.m. The agenda was deceptively bland. Expansion Project Review. He arrived first, taking his seat at the head of the long, polished table. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him offered a stunning view of the city slowly coming to life. He wondered how many people down there were walking into jobs today, praying to be seen, not as costs, but as human beings. Patricia Chin entered next. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were sharp. She knew something was coming. Harold gave her a slight nod. Their conversation last night had been brief, but pointed. She was ready. Soon, the other directors arrived. Chief Financial Officer Robert Martinez, Operations Director Linda Washington, Vice President of Marketing James Sullivan, and Board Chair William Thompson. They all greeted Harold with cordial formality, though the tension in the room was unmistakable. They knew this meeting wasn't just routine. At 8 o'clock on the dot, the screen at the far end of the boardroom came to life, and two familiar faces appeared via video conference from a regional office. Kelsey Marlowe and Greg Tillman. Harold leaned in slightly, studying them. They looked polished, confident, almost smug. Why wouldn't they be? They had delivered a seamless report. The board had praised them. The expansion was green-lit. "Good morning, everyone," Harold began, his voice steady but laced with quiet authority. "Thank you for joining me on such short notice." "Good morning, Mr. Knight," Kelsey said brightly. "We're honored to be included." Harold offered a polite nod and opened the leather portfolio in front of him. "I wanted to revisit yesterday's field assessment at Brixton Grounds Cafe." "Of course," Greg said, his tone upbeat. "We were very pleased with how that went. Strong performance metrics, great customer experience." Harold looked at him, then slowly back to Kelsey. "Yes, I heard your report," he said. "Very thorough, very optimistic." He let the pause hang in the air, long enough for discomfort to settle into the room like fog. "I was particularly interested in your comments on employee morale and customer engagement." Patricia leaned forward, sensing the shift. Kelsey, still unaware of the unraveling thread, smiled as she responded. "Yes, The team there really reflects our company's values. Strong work ethic, excellent service culture, a true model store. Harold reached into his portfolio and pulled out a photograph. He slid it across the table toward Patricia. The screen showed a high-resolution security camera still. It captured Harold, seated quietly at the cafe, while Kelsey and Greg stood over him, faces twisted in annoyance, Greg mid-sneer. "I'd like to know more about this interaction," Harold said casually. The color drained from their faces on screen. Greg stiffened. Kelsey blinked hard. We, she stammered. The mask cracked. Panic bloomed. Harold reached in again, calmly laying out more photographs, each one capturing a different moment from yesterday's cafe encounter. Maya helping children, Greg gesturing with irritation, Kelsey glaring across the cafe, the moment Greg called Harold an undesirable element. "These," Harold said softly, "are from the security footage at Brixton Grounds, your model location." He leaned back in his chair, his hands folded neatly. Then he looked straight at the screen, eyes cold and clear. "Let's talk about what really happened yesterday. Interesting perspective, don't you think?" Harold's voice sliced through the boardroom like a scalpel. Greg's face had gone ashen, the blood draining from his cheeks. "Mr. Knight, I can explain." "Please do," Harold replied, calm and composed, his gaze unblinking. "I'm particularly curious about this moment," he said, holding up a photo. "The one where you're captured referring to a customer as low value and suggesting he drags down the brand." He placed another image on the table, this one showing Kelsey mid-sentence, visibly scolding staff. "Or here, where Ms. Marlowe appears to be requesting someone be removed for, what was the phrase again? Cluttering up the customer experience." The room went utterly silent. Patricia Chin's eyes widened in stunned disbelief. Other board members looked back and forth between the printed images and the now frozen video feed of Kelsey and Greg, each face reflecting the same sinking realization. "Harold," Board Chair William Thompson said cautiously, "are you saying you were physically present at that location yesterday?" Harold nodded, rising from his chair with quiet purpose. "I spent the morning conducting my own field assessment of our culture," he said. "I bought a $2 egg sandwich and observed how our leadership team treats the people they believe don't matter." He walked to the screen. Kelsey and Greg's pixelated faces locked in expressions of pure dread. "I listened while your executives mocked employees, ridiculed customers, and treated dignity like an inconvenience. Then I watched them lie to this board, boldly, eloquently, and without a single flicker of remorse." He turned back, voice still controlled, but now underlined with fire. "Yesterday, you were presented with a report celebrating employee morale, superior customer service, and corporate excellence. Today, I'm presenting evidence that those claims were fabricated, top to bottom." He pressed a button. From the boardroom speakers came Greg's voice, clear as a bell. "People like that drag the brand down?" Then Kelsey's, "This is exactly the kind of low-value customer that dilutes our brand image." Harold let the silence that followed sink in like ice water. "The $250 million expansion you approved yesterday," he said, "was built on falsehoods, crafted by individuals who represent everything this company should reject." Then came the sentence that no one was prepared for. "It's gone." The words hit like a hammer blow. He let the room sit in the gravity of that statement. "Gone," he repeated. "Withdrawn, canceled, effective immediately." Greg looked physically ill. Kelsey's mouth opened and closed, trying to form a response, but no sound emerged. "Harold," William Thompson began, choosing his words carefully, "surely we can—" "There's nothing to discuss," Harold cut in, his voice firm. "We will not grow this company on a foundation of arrogance, cruelty, and deceit. If this is how we treat people in our own backyard, we have no business expanding to new continents. Not now, not ever." Patricia leaned forward, her voice steady. What about the thousands of current employees? The ones who weren't part of this? Harold's tone softened for the first time. They're the reason I'm doing this, he said. Yesterday, I met a young woman named Maya. She showed empathy to a stranger. She worked with integrity while being undermined by people above her. She embodies everything we say we stand for. He turned back to the screen, while your regional managers tried to erase her. Mr. Knight, Kelsey finally spoke, her voice a whisper. Please, let us explain. We were under pressure. Pressure? Harold's voice cracked like thunder. Is that what you call humiliating customers? Mocking workers? Lying to directors? He took a breath and stood tall. Ms. Marlowe, Mr. Tillman, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Greg flinched, visibly shaken. Kelsey looked like her world had shattered. You can't do this, Greg sputtered. We have contracts, which are void under Clause 12B, Harold replied coolly. Ethics violations, misrepresentation to the board, you'll find legal options, limited. He tapped a button on his phone. Security, please escort Ms. Marlowe and Mr. Tillman from the building. Their credentials are now deactivated. The boardroom froze. If Harold could eliminate 2 top executives that swiftly, what did that mean for the rest of them? But then, Harold shifted again, this time from retribution to renewal. Patricia, he said, I want Maya Rodriguez promoted to assistant store lead, full benefits, effective immediately. Patricia nodded, already noting it down. And Jennifer, the store manager. Schedule a one-on-one. If she was part of the problem, she's out. If she was just afraid, we train her. His voice softened. I don't just want to tear down what's broken. I want to build up what's right. Robert Martinez cleared his throat. Harold, about the expansion, investors, partners. Harold turned to face him. We're launching a new initiative, he said. Rio Grounds, people first. Before we build a single new store, we fix every broken one we already have. He began to pace, energized. Anonymous surveys in every location, full audits on benefits, scheduling, training. Management bonuses tied not to profits, but to employee satisfaction. He paused. This time, we're going to be who we claim to be. Linda Washington leaned in. Timeline? 6 months of audits, 6 more to implement changes. Only then, expansion resumes. I'd rather have 800 stores with soul than 2,000 that kill the spirit for profit. James Sullivan raised a concern. What about media backlash? Harold smiled for the first time that morning. There won't be backlash, James. There'll be transparency. I'm calling a press conference today. We tell the world the truth. We found rot in our structure, and we're fixing it. He straightened. We'll share Maya's story. We'll show that change is possible. When leadership listens. Patricia smiled. That's not just a pivot. That's a revolution. Over the next hour, Harold mapped out the new future. An anonymous ethics hotline, mandatory empathy training for managers, new policies focused on fairness and equity. The board listened, not as passive executives, but as participants in something bigger. And for the first time in years, Harold felt it too. Pride. That afternoon, before a sea of cameras, Harold stepped to the podium and told the world about a $2 sandwich and the young woman who inspired a corporate reckoning. The media called it the $2 revolution, and in a twist no one predicted, Knight & Company's stock actually rose. Investors realized what Harold had always known. Doing the right thing is good business. But the most important moment came 3 days later, in a quiet envelope slipped into Harold's office. It was a handwritten note. From Maya. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. This is what leadership looks like. Harold kept that note on his desk, right beside the expansion files and investor reports. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Because in the end, the man who had built an empire finally understood. Success isn't measured by profit margins or market share. It's measured by how we treat those with the least power, even the ones who can only afford a $2 sandwich.